Wanted to introduce to you is a simple practice that we use in schools that we call calming and focusing. And how many of you are parents? Yeah, okay. And how many have been teachers before or are teachers now? Okay. So we spend a lot of time telling our children to calm down and pay attention, but we don't teach them how. And it's actually really simple. So I'm going to teach you how we teach kids to calm down and pay attention. So the calming practice is simple. You can put one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly so that you can feel your body as you breathe. And if you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes or just lower your gaze and take 3 slow, deep breaths at your own pace. Noticing the sensation of the air as it goes in and out of your body. Calming your body. And when you're done, allow your breath to settle into its normal pace. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. And to focus, we're going to use our ears to focus our attention on the sound of the chime. And you'll notice as you're listening that the sound of the chime will reverberate, and follow that reverberation until you don't hear it anymore. And you can close your eyes if you'd rather, or you can also keep your eyes open, either way. Thank you. So we have found that when teachers use that practice at the beginning of a lesson or at the beginning of school, it helps bring the energy of the class together. And so it's a good thing to do here as well. So since I've been here,
move it because you're breathing.
Oh, I'm breathing into it. How's that? Is that better? No, that's. Oh, breathe.
It depends with the nose or with the mouth.
Okay. All right. Maybe it needs to be a little bit farther away. Okay. No. Okay. I will try not to breathe. Thinking about education and technology, for most of human history, children learned alongside their parents. There's a picture of a hunter-gatherer teaching his son or his daughter how to create a tool. We also see that, during agrarian times, kids learned by helping their family on the farm. And at some point or another during the Industrial Revolution, children became laborers. And not to say they were necessarily learning, they were learning skills, but they were also being oppressed by work. And today we have children looking at iPads all the time. But so this factory model of education, which we still see today in many places, arose as a revolution in to rebel against the child labor and also to prepare our citizens in a mass scale. It was kind of the first time there was a kind of industrial education. And it followed this factory model. And the way in which it did that was not only the ways in which the classrooms were set up, like these rows and chairs like this, but also there was this sort of artificial construction that children should be put in cohorts, age cohorts, and that they should go from one grade to the next grade based on their age, and that certain subjects were taught in this grade and certain subjects were taught in this grade. And it didn't really matter the individual differences of the children did not matter. They had to fit into this system, like a conveyor belt, right? Kind of like let's say you're in a factory and you're producing orange juice and oranges, and you're separating out the oranges that you're going to put in the grocery store from the oranges that are going to become juice. You know, the juice oranges are the ones that don't look so great. They didn't quite meet the standard of the kind of orange that we want to put out on those perfect oranges in the grocery store. So you can think about education that way. So some children would be the juice oranges and some children would be the grocery store oranges. And this prepared our populations for this kind of work. Well, I like to use this monoculture model as a metaphor for that kind of way of learning. And it's like the orange. You want the rows to be perfect. You want the corn to look exactly the same. But today, I would argue that we need a permaculture. We need a culture, we need an education that mirrors a diversity that you find in a very rich, healthy ecosystem. And that where every single element of that ecosystem has value, purpose, and is appreciated. So today we do find some places where children are able to demonstrate their values in different ways and collaborate and work together. And I would say that that would be where we're hopefully headed. But the problem is today, this model that we've been deploying, this regime, I like Ben's word regime, this regime that we've employed for all these years is so antiquated. It's like 120 years old. It has never caught up in mass. I mean, you do see pockets of innovation, but you know, in mass, it's still the way it was. And children and teachers know that they are working in an obsolete system. And they know they are unhappy, they are depressed, they are frustrated. Children and adolescents feel warehoused. They feel like they've just been plugged into this warehouse for 18 or till they're 18. Teachers feel like they're being expected to employ this regime, these standards that they know are not appropriate and that are not meeting the needs of their students. So they're facing a moral distress, and they're dropping out, they're quitting. They're also incredibly stressed out because of the demands of their jobs and the lack of support that they're getting. And very soon, really soon, we're going to be facing a very serious teacher crisis, a teacher shortage. It's already happening in many states of the United States. So, how do we think about education? And the fourth, since we're trying to catch up, we're still in the second, I think, Industrial Revolution. So I found this quote that I really like. It's beyond doubt that education is at the heart of preparing present and future generations to thrive. As a result, it's vital that we have an education that develops human potential rather than pits it against machines. An education system designed for an industrial economy that is now being automated requires transformation from a system based on facts and procedures to one that actively applies that knowledge to collaborative problem solving. Yeah, I think that's where we need to go very quickly. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Imagine what the world's going to be like in 20 years. Can anyone do that? I can't. So how do we prepare our children? Well, we cannot solve problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. Here's another quote from Einstein that I think is important. A human being is part of the whole called by us universe, part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires, and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Nobody is able to achieve this completely, but the striving for such achievement is in itself a part of the liberation and a foundation for inner security. So, I've been involved in I've had the privilege of being involved in developing what we now call the field of contemplative teaching and learning. What is this? Well, part of it involves discovering the self. In the same terms Brother David was talking about. What does it mean to be human? What is this mystery of life? And what kind of relationship do I want to have with myself and with others and their selves? This recognition of common humanity, oneness, and interdependence. And this becomes a basis for secular ethics, as His Holiness has articulated. And we also like to think about compassion in the broadest sense of the term. And if you've never read or heard Mathieu Ricard's talk, when he talks about compassion, he does a beautiful job of extending this understanding of compassion beyond our inner circles to the greatest circles we can think of, including compassion for future generations of all living creatures, which is something we rarely, as a society, consider at all. And wisdom, humility, and grace. And this, I think, might be critical to what we heard about yesterday. The humility to know that I don't know. Because I think the hubris that has evolved out of the Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment, that, knowledge for knowledge's sake, overlooks this. Socrates said this. Wisdom is knowing what you don't know, or that you don't know. So, a little bit about my history. I started, this is me, in about 1980, 81. I was a Montessori teacher. And I chose to become a Montessori teacher because, in my mind, that was the closest thing I could find to a contemplative method of teaching and learning at the time. That felt to me like when I was practicing my art of teaching, I was also practicing the contemplative. As a contemplative practitioner from early on, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to teach children how to discover themselves in this way. And this is the only picture I have of myself. But you can see that one of the beauties of doing this with children is sometimes it takes a while for them to catch on. But the role of the teacher is to hold the space for that experience. And some of them, join in, some of them don't. But it's okay, because it takes time. These children are all now probably 40. But this, being a teacher, working in this environment, and then moving into teacher education, I started noticing that teachers in general, without this contemplative background, were having a lot of problems because their emotion regulation or lack of emotion regulation was interfering with their teaching. And I didn't know how to help teachers with this because I was supervising student teachers, and I was trying to explain to them that when they got upset with their students' behavior, they were making things worse, and that there were more skillful ways to direct their students and help manage the problems that arise in classrooms. So I went back to graduate school and I studied stress and coping in adulthood with an understanding that I wanted to study mindfulness, but this was before anybody was studying mindfulness, or it was just beginning when I graduated. And my colleague, Mark Greenberg, and I, who was at Penn State, he just recently retired, I guess it's kind of hard to see that, but we came up with this model. And we reviewed all the literature on teacher stress, and we discovered that nobody had really studied teacher stress, which kind of astounded me. And we knew already that we were aiming for these student academic and behavioral outcomes on this far end. We knew that the healthy classroom climate, the social environment and the interactions in that environment are critical to those outcomes. We also knew from a lot of research that the relationship between the teacher and the student plays an important role in that, and the classroom management, how the classroom behavior is managed, and social emotional learning program implementation. We all had evidence for those working. What we didn't know is what are the social and emotional skills teachers need to do all this work. The other thing that we hadn't looked at a lot was what are the community and school factors that support this ability of teachers and classrooms to do this. We also discovered that teachers were burning out, and that there seems to be this process that happens that we call the burnout cascade. That teachers start by facing demands, cognitive, emotional demands that are overwhelming, and they are often not prepared to deal with. The feeling of stress and feeling stressed out reduces their resilience and their ability to respond to disruption. They become emotionally exhausted. The teachers become overreactive, and this contributes to further classroom disruption. So you end up with this sort of negative spiral. And I was seeing this happen in classrooms, and I saw how teachers sometimes created their own problems. And I thought, how can I explain this to them? There's like, it's hard. So I realized that I wanted to find a way to bring these contemplative practices into teacher preparation. And my colleagues who have been studying this and I came up with this combination of practices, compassion practices, mindful awareness practices, and emotion skills training, because what we discovered was in order for a person who's in the midst of a emotionally provocative moment to be able to regulate that, they have to be able to notice and sense how they're feeling, and they need to understand how emotions function and what they feel like and how they affect your thinking and your behavior. So the program involves that. And over time, my colleagues who've been studying this and I came up with this model that we call the kind, clear, calm model. And this is how we define a mindful, quote-unquote, mindful teacher or compassionate teacher. Has these dimensions. And Pauline has been doing some qualitative work on this, and I'm going to have her introduce a little bit of her work in a minute. So the program we developed is called CARE, Cultivating Awareness and Resilience in Education. And because we wanted to be able to have impacts on not just the teacher's well-being, but the classroom environment and the student outcomes, we figured we needed a pretty intensive program to show these impacts. So this program is 5 days long. We do 2 days back-to-back at the beginning in the fall, and then we spread out a couple more days over the course of the rest of the school year. And in between those sessions, we coach them over the phone about how to develop their own practice on their own and how to apply their skills they're learning to their classroom situations. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. Oops. So the program, we introduced the program with self-care. Teachers are often not very good at caring for themselves because they're focused on a lot of the time. And we also ground it in the teacher's own secular ethics. So we invite the teachers to reflect on that, why they became a teacher, why they're doing what they're doing, and we use that as an intention setting, like a lodestone for them to come back to so that they remember that as they go through their day. Like, why am I doing this? What's the purpose? Then we do a series of activities around emotion awareness, different mindful awareness practices, compassion practices, and one of those is we do a series of listening practices that help the teacher touch into how they're feeling because they're talking about situations that trigger their emotions, and then they also learn how to listen more deeply to others. And in that process, they learn about their own emotional habits and patterns. So we've been doing a series of studies on care that were funded by the United States government, which has been really exciting. And our most recent one was just published. Part of the data was published in a paper in 2017, and we have another one that's coming out pretty soon. But we wanted to look at, were we improving the teachers, the classrooms, and the students? And what we found, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, and if you want to know more, I can talk to you later, but we had teacher self-reports, classroom observations, which was an objective measure of the classroom interactions, and teachers reporting on their students. And we found reductions in psychological distress and time urgency, and improvements in mindfulness and emotion regulation. We found significant improvements in the emotional supportiveness of the classroom, which involved improved teacher sensitivity and a more positive emotional climate in the classroom. And finally, the students were more engaged in the classroom. And as a former teacher, all of that really made a lot of sense to me, but to prove it in a randomized trial with 220 teachers, 226 teachers, and 5,200 children in New York City was exciting. And as far as I know, this is the first time that anybody has shown that by basically dropping a pebble in the pond, it has ripple effects in the environment and in the other entities in that environment. Because I thought I had more time, I'm going to kind of quickly go through this. I already just did. The teacher improvement, the classroom improvement, and the student improvement, but the whole idea of this sort of downstream effects of these practices. We did not teach the teachers to teach differently. We did not teach the teachers to teach mindfulness. We just helped them be more mindful. And so that's exciting. So a more recent project that I've been working on is called the Compassionate Schools Project. This is a reinvention of health, PE, and social emotional learning that integrates mindful awareness practices and yoga for kids. And we've been doing a large randomized trial of this program in Louisville, Kentucky, with elementary schools. And we don't have data to report on yet, but so far the teachers love it and they've been having a positive experience with it. The teachers in this program, I'm going to let Paulina tell you a little bit about this because this is Paulina's data. Paulina has been doing qualitative work on the teachers and their ability to understand what we're trying to teach and how we're teaching it. So Paulina, you deliver your data.
Great. Okay, so I wanted to share my...
Oh, yeah.
Here I am.
Sorry. Ah, there we go. Hello? Can you hear me? Okay, great.
Start.
Okay. All right. So I wanted to share two stories.
It's impossible. No, it does. Done.
Okay. All right. Great. So I am doing research on how teachers can mindfully teach mindfulness, and I wanted to share with you two stories that are contrasting examples that help us to understand this. So the first one is of Mrs. M and the grasshopper. And this happened in a classroom right after the teacher and the students led the calming and focusing, which we did at the beginning of Tisha's talk. And Miss M notices that one of the students, Toby, is looking at something on the floor and edging away from something. And she asks, "Are you okay, Toby?" And Toby says, "There's a grasshopper." And so all the students, rush around and start looking at the grasshopper and talking very loudly. There's this one student, D, who's especially loud and especially excited. And Miss M asks D to watch over the classroom. She says, "Keep in mind a friend who is sitting on their bottom while I take care of our friend the grasshopper, and they can't be talking." And she goes and she picks up the grasshopper in a cup and she takes him outside while Dee is carefully watching to see, who's sitting on their bottom. And she comes back, Miss M comes back, And she tells D to keep in mind the friend for a later activity, and she sits to begin the lesson. But the students are still a little chatty, still a little excited about the grasshopper. And she says, it's okay. There was a little grasshopper. We took him out. Now take a deep breath and let it go. And most students are able to, take a deep breath and let it go. But there are still some students who are super excited. And one of them says, what if there were lots of grasshoppers, thousands of grasshoppers? And she says, that's a good segue. I can usually handle one because I don't like to kill them, because that's just how I feel about bugs. But if there were more, what emotion would that bring up? And so they start saying scared, surprised, I would kill them, fear. And she uses this to segue to the topic of the day, which is adrenaline, by asking what hormone would be released if I felt fear. So that's story number 1. And here's story number 2. Now, I was very lucky or unlucky to observe these 2 instances, I'm not sure. But this is about Miss S and the bug in a 3rd grade classroom. And at this point, the students are taking turns leading the calming and focusing, which we did. And she notices some students are in the back and they're chatting and they're looking at something in the back. And so she says, shh, focus, be respectful now. And some students, turn back and they're doing the calming and focusing. And she says, excellent. But then there are still some students who, are looking and kind of seeing what's there. And so she's like, shh, shh. But still, some other students get excited around, so they kind of edge towards, and some very more confident and curious person says, look. And another says, it's a bug, oh my God. And Miss S, in an irritated fashion, says, here, let me get rid of it. And she walks over to the bug and stomps on it and moves it with her foot side to side. And to which the students are like, no, 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 don't kill it. And she says, he's been bugging me all morning. And she tries to continue the lesson. We're going to a little place, but the students are still looking at this dead bug, and they can't let it go. And so she walks over to the bug and kicks it to the side of the room and says, there, now he won't bother our concentration. And so, and the students, are still a little rowdy, so she tells another student to lead another round of breathing, and she's like, oh no, I'm sorry, missed the part. Okay, there he won't bother our concentration. And one student says, we could have eaten the bug. Another student says, ew. And then another student quietly and softly says, we could have saved it and put it outside. And so she ignores these comments and asks another student to lead the round of breathing. And she says, wow, she's making us really focus now. And so the students eventually quiet down and continue the lesson. So we are looking at these types of examples, and I'm trying to pull out these examples from my observations of teachers teaching so that we can help teachers to understand what does it truly mean to be mindful in the classroom and mindfully teach mindfulness. And I'm working right now with the Calm, Clear, Kind model, which Tish talked about. And I don't want to take too much time, but just so you can see a sample of how I'm looking at the data, how Miss M's voice remains calm while Miss S responds to irritation. He's been bugging me all morning. No pun intended, for how Miss M is aware of the issues. She's aware of the opportunities to integrate mindfulness learning, while Miss S is distracted by her personal reaction, and she's unaware or ignoring the issue of potentially killing the bug and the opportunity to integrate mindfulness. Miss M is compassionate towards the students who are distracted. She's always calm, and she's compassionate towards the bug, while Miss S kills the bug and ignores the suffering students who are now suffering because of the dead bug. Authenticity is also something that I'm looking at. It's about being able to, is the teacher promoting mindfulness? Does the teacher understand mindfulness? And both promote mindfulness practice, but Miss M is able to connect the present moment to a mindfulness learning opportunity. While Miss M, she shows an adequacy and understanding. She kicks away the distraction. She pushes it away. And then finally, about empowering, you know, it's interesting, there's still room for growth for both teachers. So both involve the students in the management, but neither involve the student in decision-making of what should we do with this bug? What should we do with this? So it's, you know, something that they can work on, what Tish was saying about, you know, teaching kids how to problem solve themselves. So hopefully these kind of examples can help teachers to understand how we can model mindfulness in the classroom. And I'll hand it out. Thank you. Oh, sorry, you don't need that. You need this. Yeah.
So I just have a couple of other slides quickly. I know my time's almost out, but I want to tell you a little bit about some of the things we're doing that are technology related and some ideas I have for the future. We're using a simulated classroom that is, it's a virtual reality, but it involves an actor in the background playing the role of the children. So it's actually run by a person, but it gives teachers an opportunity to experience some stress in a classroom before they actually have to go into a real classroom. And we're doing an experiment right now that involves a brief mindfulness experience before they go into the simulator or not, to see if it helps them manage their physiology, the physiological markers of stress. And then, it's not on? It's,
Turn it off again.
is it now? No?
Can I speak?
Now? Okay. And I can talk more about that if you want to learn more later. I have a little video I was going to show, oops, I'm going to skip that, of some of us doing it. There's a lot of people working on how to transform education today, and the OECD has this publication that I recommend. Also, I'm on a National Academy of Sciences committee that's examining how mindfulness and compassion practices like yoga meditation can be implemented in schools effectively to improve mental health and behavioral health in schools. These are some ideas for 21st century upgrade of education. We really need to elevate the teacher's status everywhere. I mean, the only place I've found that where it's really working is Finland. And we need to empower students. Today, students have a lot of ability to contribute, and we're completely ignoring their ability. They could be providing so much, especially their ability to envision is something we could really use. And smart technology. Now, this could take me a whole thing to talk about, but if we had good data systems that were interactive and smart and responded to individual students, it would be easier for teachers to monitor how their children were learning. Children could monitor their own learning, and we could track their learning using epidemiological methods instead of randomized trials, which are incredibly expensive and difficult to do in educational settings. Also today, there's evidence that games can be used to assess learning. And why are we putting our kids through these horrible standardized tests when we could have them play a video game and find out how much math they know, you know? So my motto, I was asked for my motto, is be the change you wish to see in the world. And I think that's how we change education. Thank you. So we have a little bit of time, we have like 10 minutes for questions? Yeah, anybody have any questions? Oh.
What do you think is the impact of this kind of school activity on the society? Do people know about it? Is there news reports or some kind of echo?
Yeah, it is becoming, he was asking if you know, what's society's response to this work. In the United States, it's becoming very well-known and popular. In the United States also, it has this tendency to be kind of hyped, overhyped, like Cliff was saying. And so, you know, I'm cautiously optimistic about what's going on in the schools. I also know in the UK, They have a couple of very large studies. It's been implemented in really big ways, and I know in other countries as well. We have folks here from Argentina who are doing work. It's spreading in Germany and Switzerland, and it's really spreading everywhere. I'm going to do a workshop in Bavaria after this, so and my book has been translated in several languages, and it's about to be translated in Spanish soon, right? But, yeah.
Parents happy or they protect?
Most parents are happy. We do run across some barriers around religion, and so we've had to be really cautious about ensuring that what we do is completely secular. In the United States, crossing that boundary is not allowed. And some people who are not very skillful bring in vocabulary or practices that are inherently spiritual, and we have to be really careful not to do that and to really base what we're doing on physiology. And that's why I like studying physiology, because then I can say, you see, we're helping lower heart rate, improving heart rate variability, things like that. Yeah, Miriam?
I was reading. But the question is not only about reception. If we talk about impact, the question. The question is not only about reception. When we talk about impact, what does this translate into? So these kids, what is this likely that they learn in you in school to be transferred into them being active citizens, so their engagement, and that's to me the question afterwards, which has to be looked into. I think there's much hope in it. I want to reiterate, having lived in the States and then on the German school system, different types of schools. In California, it was normal that twice a week from kindergarten up to 6th grade, external mindfulness teachers and yoga teachers came into school. That was well received by the parents, and the impact could be very clearly talking to teachers. It was obvious. But then, of course, the question, how do these kids cooperate among each other after school? How do they treat others? How do they treat the environment? All this goes on. But just to say that all of you have come or have been in different countries and have looked into school systems, there's much going on, and luckily these things are changing, and it's very well received. And that's to your question. And Germany is trying to make changes in this regard right now too.
Are smartphones allowed by the students?
In the schools I've looked into, of course they use it more, that's US, but still there's a very conscious focus on that. And Waldorf school and the schools I've looked into, they have a very amazing policy about training ethics of use of devices before you use them. Yeah. So that's many years of training. That's Waldorf school in California.
I just want to build on what you said. I'm teaching a class at the University of Virginia called Mindfulness in Health and Human Development. It's for undergraduates, and we have 2.5 hours every week in a room that's set up for meditation, to sit on the floor with cushions and yoga mats, and we put all of our technology away. And it's hard for students at that age to put their technology away. But once they do, they feel really freed of it. And over the course of a semester of not having their technology with them, they start to recognize that there's value in not constantly focusing on it. There are also some practices, there are mindful awareness practices on recognizing the impulse to look at your phone and noticing that and working with it, just like we work with the impulse to yell or the impulse to do whatever or eat something we shouldn't eat or smoke a cigarette or whatever. That it's the same practice of learning how to overcome addictions using mindfulness. And I found that class has really transformative impacts on those students, just from having that time together without any, and practicing and talking and reflecting and drawing. Paulina brought art into that class this last year, which was wonderful. Oh, Cliff is over here.
This is a question for both Paulina and you. Something where the examples with above I found extraordinarily compelling. And one of the things you said is teacher S, Miss S, taught mindfulness But did she? Because the technique delivered without the poise, I don't believe can be what you're aiming for at all. In fact, it teaches an instrumentalization of something that's fundamentally like a piece of cardboard. And then that's what gets embodied.
That's what I meant when I was pointing to the critical importance of the teacher when it comes to teaching anything, but in particular these practices, because you have to be able to hold that environment and that space to contain the, and also transmit, in a sense, in a particular kind of sense. This mindful awareness. And it's interesting, thank you. We didn't want to go into too much detail with this study, but those are two teachers that were scoring high and low on fidelity of implementation. This is part of an experiment. So this teacher that is not doing very well, she is not embodying mindfulness. And so what Pauline is trying to figure out is, what does she need? And can she even do it with practice? And what kind of training does she need to move past that? And the other thing, was she a PE teacher also? Yeah. So the other situation in this study was, doing research in schools is really hard. We inherited, half of our teachers were regular PE teachers who were not particularly happy about doing this, but were told they had to. The other half were hired people who already wanted to do this and knew what it was. So Miss S, that's Miss S, right, was one of the PE teachers. So she wasn't even bought in that much. But Paulina, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
I think it's an interesting.
So one thing I wanted to say is that no one's perfect. And we all make mistakes. And this teacher, she, if we go on like proportion, most of the time she wasn't presenting mindfulness in an authentic manner, but there were times that she was. One of the things that she did do is she knew that she didn't know the content very well and admitted that she could be potentially making mistakes. But during the times of the observations, I still saw students who were using, just the 3 breaths to calm themselves down. So they're still taking something from it. Maybe it's not a complete, 100% understanding of mindfulness, but at least these little practices they're still taking, and they can still now better understand their emotions. So I think there's still benefit, and I tried to find in my research teachers who were high fidelity as well as low fidelity to really get that contrast. And what I was surprised to find, when I heard PE teachers, I was like, oh! But what I was really relieved and happy to find is that all the teachers, even if they felt like they were the worst, least compassionate teachers in the world, they still felt that this was useful for the students, that they learned themselves how to be more mindful and more aware. So I think there's still benefit toward it. And there were several transformational stories as well of PE teachers who were resistant at first, but then became more passionate.
Ben?
So my question kind of falls on this, and it's inspired by the last thing you said about assessments. Sorry. One of the things I thought was very interesting about that story is teacher S seems to be wanting to get through the lesson in spite of everything that happens, as opposed to the things that are happening becoming incorporated into the lesson. Which, take out the mindfulness component, there's a better style of teaching and a worse style of teaching where one is engaged with one's classroom and know that some kids are going to pop up and say something very loud and excited, and others are just going to keep sitting there quietly and you know what I mean? So it's about the dynamics of the classroom as opposed to merely the imparting of the lesson to the students. But of course, assessments, for the most part, as I understand, at least in our country, are structured around the assessment of the individual in spite of the dynamics of the classroom. So I was wondering, you made comments about better assessments of those individuals, but I wonder if the assessment of the dynamics of the classroom and its relationship to the assessment of the individual figures into this picture in any way, since that audit structure is of course about as powerful a structure for shaping educational practices and policy as there is.
That's a really good question, Ben. I mean, in my ideal imaginary world, a assessment system would include the assessment system would actually integrate the assessment of the interactions in that environment, the social environment, and the individual elements, and look at the relationships among them. I have a colleague at UVA who's doing some really interesting work on peer relationships and peer networks. And what he finds is the more aware a teacher is of the peer networks and the dynamics among the students, the better the students learn. When the teacher knows what the relationship's like, and the teacher also attempts to level the hierarchies in that environment. So there are really specific things that teachers can do to do that, but they're often not taught how. So yeah, that's a really good question. Did I miss part of the first part of your question? Or did I? That was it?
Do you have ideas for what would the fix be?
What would the what?
What would the fix be? What would the intervention? This is salient.
Well, okay, so if our tech people who started out making games for educational purposes, I mean, Electronic Arts started out doing educational work, but then they went to the dark side because they had to make billions of dollars. If they could actually return to their original idea and build games that could, embedded in them, help teachers in real time see how their kids were doing, they would never have to take another test. And there would be dashboards and, for each kid, and the kids could monitor their own learning. And this could go into a cloud where systems could see where are the gaps, where do we need to put more attention, is this working? We could use epidemiology instead of randomized trials. But this data would have to be interactive because we don't want to impose a new regime, I love your word, of data, big data on top of this. It would have to be smart. And now I'm moving beyond my knowledge base. But I'm sure it would be interesting to talk about the ethical dilemmas involved in those kinds of, regime change.
I had a quick question. Just saying, you were talking about some of the parents, you had to be wary of the religious aspect. But were there any parents who were so impressed with the mindfulness of their children, they came back and said, in parent-teacher conferences, what are they learning? How can I learn this? Or could it affect them?
Yeah, one thing we always do also is we inform the parents about what's happening. It's really critical that the parents be informed and be told what we're doing, and usually we like to give them some kind of introduction to it at a parent night or something like that. But the other thing we've learned that I think is really fascinating is children report to us that they're teaching their parents skills, and the parents tell us that too, that when their parents are having an argument, the student will say, "Mommy, I think you need to take a breath." So it does seem to be impacting the family and their home as well. Thank you. How are we doing on time? Oh, we have 5 minutes, right? Oh, Miriam?
So, I want to support just quickly what you said, so that feedback loop, if it's well set up from the beginning, this needs the vision from the beginning that it's a community thing for a school. It's not just for a teacher, it's not just teacher teaching mindfulness, if you want to call it mindfulness to kids, but there's a thing which involves changing the system, and that's not systems again. I want to reiterate that. In that school in California, when I looked at the external teachers coming in, I sat in the class, I taught the same thing then too. So I've really seen that, how parents reacted and how it changed the school environment. There was a point where, because it was not so well set up at the beginning, involving all parents, I felt there's a lack of, because it needs that involvement. So I suggested, I didn't want to use the term mindfulness. It was overused in that school at that moment. So we made a gratitude project out of it. The term mindfulness was out, but all the qualities, if you talk about teaching mindfulness, which make up becoming more human, becoming more pro-social, caring for the environment, caring for the other, for the unknown, so the foreigner, the person I might not like. So all this is involved there, and the compassion, mindfulness, that's the title. And we did a beautiful project on that, not using the term, but everybody got involved, even the school administrators, the gardeners, the Mexican cooks, and so on. So that's then people can feel, well, that's something new, and this from inside, from the bottom, may change systems. I also want to point to Margaret Rasted. She was in Argentina too. Some of you might know her, but she's like a might be a bit tipping out of the crowd because she dared to change one public school in Berlin. Amazing, it's so amazing that people often don't believe it, but we looked into it more closely. So she dissolved the school, so it was all ages coming together. The teacher was just a mentor, so you got paid to be a mentor one-on-one instead of teaching the normal subjects. They changed subjects. They had completely new subjects like challenge, social work in a school environment outside of school. They did amazing things, and this can be done. It seems far away.